Reading 110 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3, Great Animal House, February 21st, 1948. Commentary on Time. Work ideas. 1. Centers work at different speeds. 2. On one occasion, Ouspensky asked Gurdjieff, "What is time?" Gurdjieff replied, "Time is breath." Commentary, Part 1. This commentary is on some of the ideas about time in the work. We will begin with the question of speed in different centers. The centers in man do not work at the same speed. What can be understood by the term speed of centers? Take this example. If you were to think how to move while running downstairs, you would probably fall. Why? Because your thinking would be slower than your movement. Again, if you have to think how to drive your car, you will probably have an accident. Why? Because when you know how to drive your car, you scarcely think how to drive it. What then takes charge of you when you run downstairs or drive a car? The moving center. Its mind is working. The speed of this center outstrips the speed of our ordinary thinking, and by this I mean our formatory center, which is one part of the intellectual center, the slowest part. I am not speaking of emotional thinking, for example, which is far quicker and is comparable to what people call intuition. Now, we understand that a slow person takes in things slowly, and a quick person quickly. The slow person takes things in one at a time. The quicker person takes in two things together. The latter can see connections between things that the slower person does not see. Some people like to say, "one thing at a time," and think it is a good, sound maxim. They like to get one thing finished first before they go on to the next. Having, say, deployed their troops laboriously on the right flank, they are astonished to find that the enemy has been massing his guns opposite them all the while. They cannot think in terms of second or opposing force, but only in terms of what they wish to do. Now, what is quicker means what is more comprehensive. We all perhaps have had flashes of another consciousness in which we saw many things together. We can be sure that this is due to the working of some part of a center that has a higher rate of speed and sees all together. Now, when a center is working whose speed is great, we experience the paradox of everything going very slowly and also of everything going in a flash. Sometimes our lives appear in this double way, and I would say they always do. When, for example, we are in a car accident, we may become conscious in moving center. This center works 30,000 times more quickly than does the ordinary part of intellectual center that we use. We then see everything as if in slow motion. Why? Because we are taking in far more impressions. The rate of perception, when we are momentarily conscious in moving center, is enormously increased in the ratio of 1 to 30,000, ideally speaking, or at least something similar. You know, if you take a cinema film of a jumping horse race and expose, say, only 6 pictures a second on the screen, the horses will go like lightning and violently. The normal rate is, say, 24. Now, if you expose, say, 40 pictures a second on the screen, the horses seem to sail slowly over jumps without effort, without violence. In fact, you will get the impression that they are not doing anything, but that the medium they are in is doing it, as if it formed vacuums and pressures that drew them up or pushed them down. Now, when we become momentarily conscious in a center, or part of one, that works at a higher rate of speed, we see things in slow motion. We take more photographs per second. It may seem endless time before our car hits the other car, and yet it may seem all over in a flash. Yes, to our ordinary centers, it all took half a second. But to a center working at a higher speed, that half second became expanded enormously, and so it seemed a long time before the crash came. This double experience of time has always interested me. Let us now take the emotional center. This center can see many things together if it is really working, and can draw so much together and connect it into a whole that it seems like clairvoyance. But since the emotional center is drenched with negative emotions and personal self-emotions, it rarely can perform its proper task, and usually only makes us ill. If you can grasp that a higher speed of working of a center means expanded time, and a lower speed of working means contracted time, it may help you to realize that our experience of time is relative to our state. You can, for instance, imagine a vast musical composition contracted down for small, poor orchestras, and then expanded to its fullness when all its inner octaves and variations and subtleties are heard. So are our lives in small parts of centers. There are many recorded experiences, going far back in literature, of people experiencing a change of time, in the sense of expanded time. For example, they have believed they have been in some place, some other level of life for days or years, and yet, falling down into the ordinary time rate, have found it only a few seconds. Each second of our time contains many other scales of time. The higher centers in man work at enormous rates compared with the formatory center, which works most slowly of all centers and parts of centers in man. Seen from higher centers, the whole of one's life can be a moment. Yes, but also paradoxically, each moment of your life can become a life. In dreams, time obviously varies. Dreams are of many kinds and come from different centers. Some long dreams take only a few seconds of clock time. So one begins to see that psychic or inner time is different from solar or clock time, or, to speak clumsily, physical or outer time. The visible or outer surface of our bodies is in physical time, which does not vary and goes at the same rate for all, although I have wondered if it does, because there seems so much time on one day and so little on another. Still, if some kind of time did not go in the same way for all, it would be awkward, as we might keep suddenly appearing or disappearing. So our bodies remain in one time. Our mental life, thoughts, feelings, in short, our inner psychic life, can experience many rates of time. Now, each center is a mind of special kind, related to one aspect of life, and each center has its speed. And again, each part of a center is a sub-mind and has its speed. You have heard that each center works with its own energy, or petrol. These different energy matters in the work are called hydrogens. Formatory part of intellectual center, in which our consciousness usually dwells, works with hydrogen 48, and this is a very slow center and a heavy petrol. Emotional center should work with petrol, or energy, of half the density, namely hydrogen 24. If it does, it can theoretically work 30,000 times more quickly than formatory center at its fullest extent. But usually it works with a denser petrol. Even so, you can observe the quickness of emotional center in negative states, in jealousy, suspicion, etc. Sex center should work with hydrogen 12, but rarely does, usually using 48. Moving center should work with 24 and may do in moments of danger, or reversely, stops working, so to speak, in the paralysis of fear. Practice can make it use its proper hydrogen, as in the long training of jugglers, where movements are quicker than the mind behind your eye can follow. The two higher centers work with hydrogen 12 and 6. If we were conscious in either of them, if one or the other were behind the eye, the movements of a juggler would appear extremely slow, speaking from one angle. The denser the energy material, the slower the working. In the absolute, at the summit of the ray of creation, the finest energy, which might be called hydrogen 1, penetrates and comprehends everything simultaneously. Its speed of work is beyond all human comprehension. The speed of light, 130,000 odd miles a second, is very, very slow motion by comparison. Part 2. In answer to Ouspensky's question, "What is time?" Gurdjieff replied, "Time is breath." What can this possibly mean? We can, however, with some reflection, realize that living things do not breathe at the same rate. We cannot, for instance, imagine that a minute organism, such as an amoeba, a minute living cell, takes 3 seconds to inspire and express the air. Now, the time of man's breathing is about 3 seconds. He breathes in and out. That is, his complete cycle of breathing is roughly about 20 to the minute. In pneumonia, when the intake of oxygen is impaired by the affected, consolidated parts of the lungs, he has to breathe more rapidly, when more oxygen is required. Yet, he has an average time of breath of 3 seconds. Mr. Ouspensky made out, at Gurdjieff's suggestion, a table of time in regard to this idea, namely that time is breath. But first, we must understand that when Gurdjieff said time is breath, he showed that by the sort of time man lives in, he means his relation to time. We have already seen that time is different in different centers. Muhammad saw a jar of water falling off the table. He went into a trance and was in paradise for a long time. When he fell asleep again, that is, when he emerged into ordinary time, the water had not yet reached the floor. So he was in a different order of time. Now the earth is a living thing from the work standpoint, and its time is different from our time. Understand again that time is different not only for different centers, but for different classes of beings. The time, say, of a cell is different from our time. A cell lives from our view for a very short time, yet for itself it lives as long as we do. Let us see briefly how the table of time deals with this difficult idea. In this table, we have first of all the idea that man can only take in an impression that lasts for a certain time, in this case for roughly a 10,000th of a second. An electric spark, a flash of light lasting for 1/10,000th of a second, can just make an effect on his eye, that is, on his retina. Something far quicker will make no impression. It will not affect the machinery of the eye, being too quick for it. It is the same with the ear, which only can take in vibrations of sound up to a certain point. The next idea is time is breath. In the case of man, breath, as was said, is roughly 3 seconds. Now comes in a curious idea called time of waking and sleeping. All organisms, minute or great, have a time of sleep, a time of waking, and they are quite different for different classes of beings. Finally comes the time of life, taken in the case of man as roughly 80 years. Understand that these figures are approximate. Now, if you will notice, the relation between each degree is roughly 30,000. That is, 30,000 times 1/10,000th of a second. the time of quickest reception of impressions in man, is 3 seconds, which is man's time of breath. 30,000 times 3 seconds is roughly his time of waking and sleeping, namely 24 hours, or day and night. And 30,000 times day and night is roughly 80 years, the time of his life. Now, tonight, we will scarcely go further, save to say that the world below man, the world or cosmos of cells, of which man is built up, has a different time, and the world or cosmos that man lives in, namely organic life, has another time in comparison to man. Man is composed of cells, myriads of them. Man lives in organic life on earth. A cell compared to man is as 0 to infinity. A man in regard to all the living organic life on earth, plants, fishes, birds, animals, etc., is again a mere dot, and so as 0 to infinity. Later on, more will be said of this. Notice that to organic life, a man is unimportant, and that to a man, a single cell in his body is unimportant. Now you may ask, what is the use of all this? It only complicates everything. Our trouble is that we suffer from a wrong feeling of I. Now this work is all about reaching a different feeling of I. One way of doing this is to realize generally, from your inner understanding, and not from your false personality, pretending to be modest, that we are very small in the totality of things. This emotional perception purifies the emotional center. Why? Well, think, reflect for yourselves. The work says, we must realize our nothingness. Yes, not artificially, but in a real sense. This drains the emotional center of self-emotions and so opens it to another order of influences, namely higher centers, which are fully formed and work in us continually. Only we cannot hear what they say, being what we are. These big cosmic diagrams can help us to realize our position on this earth and our state of being.